Hello and welcome to this Tuesday edition of the Watchdog. My name is William Vogo, and on the show tonight, uncovering the roots of corruption within the public sector. The Public Service Commission has released its final installment of the Pulse of the Public Service Report for 2022, and Commissioner Anele Goia joins me to take us through some of their findings. Ramaphosa optimistic even as conference adjourns without concluding its business. Political analysts Asanda Ngwasheng and Professor Peggy Mngomezulu join me as we reflect on the last day of that conference. The Watchdog starts now. The Public Service Commission has released its final pulse of the Public Service Report for the year 2022. PSC Commissioner Anele Goia joins us to talk us through some of the findings the monitoring body has made around the challenges still facing the Public Service. Commissioner Goia, good evening. Thanks very much for your time. I mean, looking back at the last three quarterly reports you have released, one feels like, you know, the more things change, the more they actually stay the same.
Good evening to you, Vuyo, and good evening to the viewers of the Watchdog. Indeed, we are faced with a plethora of challenges in the public service. In that public servants seem not to be willing to comply with the regulations, because the public sector itself is a highly regulated environment. However, we are of the view that the biggest problem that we are sitting with is that there is lack of consequence management in the public sector. And as soon as managers begin to manage, there will be a change. So our focus now is on managers to ensure that they do what they are responsible for, and that is managing the public service properly.
Is that, I mean, the unwillingness to comply, is it as a direct result of there being no consequences, or could there be other factors? Have you been able to put a finger on that?
Look, our view as the Public Service Commission is that in most instances, the public servants would always complain that they did not comply with this or that regulation because there was an unlawful instruction given to them, and they had to carry out that unlawful instruction. And we have consistently told them that they can't make unlawful instructions an excuse, because we are of the view that they know accounting officers are supposed to know what the legal provisions are in terms of implementing the programs of government, and therefore they can't be instructed to do things to the contrary. And they know that there are processes that have to be followed in implementing those provisions of the public service. So we are focusing on the issue of the unlawful instructions, and we have given them a guide in terms of how they should go about, because we are saying that if there is an instruction that comes to you that forces you to flout the provisions of the Public Finance Management Act, you need to get those instructions in writing. And as a public servant, you also have a responsibility to guide your political principles in terms of the effects of those instructions, and how some of the things cannot be done, and that you also do in writing, so as to be able to cover yourself in the event you have to account. And if that instruction has to be implemented, and you need to get permission from a provincial treasury at the level of the province, or national treasury if we speak about the national departments, as well as the concurrence of the Auditor General, so that at the end of the day you are able to cover yourself in terms of the basic accountability.
Well, I mean, I would imagine that, I mean, this has been with us for many, many years, that for, you know, these public servants to be able to, for even insisting that a political principal, whether it's a minister or an MEC or a mayor, you know, that they, you know, send you the instruction in writing is, I mean, often the difference between keeping your job.
The buck stops with the accounting officer. We will not be asking the MEC or the minister when there is an irregular expenditure or when there is a wasteful expenditure in a department. The person who needs to account for that is the accounting officer. Therefore, it is the responsibility of the accounting officer to guide the political principal in terms of the legal provisions and what can and cannot be done. So it is very important that we have that recorded. So what we would then be going for is that anyone who is found guilty of spending public resources in an irregular manner or in a wasteful manner must be held to account. So there should be consequences for such actions, and we should not be bogged down to whether there was an illegal instruction or not, because in our view, you don't have to carry out an illegal or an unlawful instruction.
I mean, executive authorities, ministers, mayors, MECs, I mean, issue these instructions knowing fully well that they are wrong, that these instructions are illegal, you know, or have nothing or very little to do with what needs to be done and who's best placed to do it. I guess a different way of asking is whether or how much have we put in place, in other words, to then enable these officials to insist on these executive authorities doing the right thing without them facing tough decisions about whether or not, you know, they can, or which may result in them keeping or not keeping their job. In other words, have we empowered them? Have we built into the system the kinds of things that would enable them to actually tell these executive authorities that you are wrong, or if you're insisting that I should do this, put it in writing?
The laws of South Africa are clear in terms of the procedures that have to be taken when you have to release someone from a job. You can't wake up in the morning and decide to get rid of any official.
But,
and there has been
but people do, Commissioner. I mean, that's our reality. I mean, these things happen. People do fire people by any means necessary, and that has happened.
But if you have noticed, those officials who have challenged those unlawful dismissals or unfair dismissals, many of them are back in the system. Many of them had to be reinstated, and a lot of money was lost in the process from the state. So what we are saying is that people must just have the courage to do the right thing. You can't be dismissed from your job for doing the right thing. Yes, of course, people will be suspended. People will be taken to go and sit at home and earn their salaries sitting at home because they did not carry out this or that instruction. But one thing I can guarantee any official there is no way you will be dismissed for having refused to carry out an unlawful instruction and you don't win that case, either at the bargaining council or at the labor court. You will win that case hands down. There are many examples of such cases. Some of the officials were kept for long periods at home until they went on retirement. Yes, of course, it's not nice to sit at home. It's quite frustrating because you don't know what your future entails. But imagine you carry out an unlawful instruction in order to preserve your job, and it is discovered that you performed an unlawful act and you flouted the same public service regulations. You will lose your job, and you will justifiably be dismissed. And the person who gave you that instruction will still remain in their positions. So it's very important that public servants put a balance between what is right in terms of the policies of government and preserving their jobs in an unethical manner. Because what is important is that public servants have to espouse the highest levels of ethics. They should be the defenders of the Constitution.
Of course, I mean, Commissioner, there's also issues of competency, skills, the ability generally for a person in whatever position to be able to do their work. And Auditor General report after Auditor General report has shown, a very significant problem, especially in local government, where people who are supposed to account for public monies actually don't have the capacity to do so. What they end up doing is to bring in people from outside to do jobs that they are supposed to be doing.
Yes, of course, there's a deeper crisis, especially in local government, where you find out, for example, some of the municipalities have got CFOs, but in their expenditure, they spend money on consultants to come and draft the financial statements, but they've got a CFO. Someone must come and draft a budget for them, but there is a CFO who gets a salary on a monthly basis. There are such instances, which of course have led to, for instance, a call for the single public service and also the professionalization of the public service. Because if you say you professionalize the public service, you go further to say public servants should belong to professional bodies so that whenever they are found wanting in terms of adherence to rules and regulations of the game, then they can also be deregistered by their professional bodies. And if you are deregistered by a professional body, you automatically lose your job, because you can't be employed if you don't belong to a particular professional body. So that's why the professionalization framework, hence our excitement as the Public Service Commission that the Cabinet has indeed processed and passed the professionalization framework, which would then be taken to Parliament and become a law, and we will be able to enforce that. And that will help to professionalize the public service, and also it will then hinder some of the mishaps that are happening now. And it will then cut across all levels and all spheres of government.
I mean, will it also deal with those who are already, I mean, in the system, who were hired not through a merit-based, recruitment process or system, were hired due to their, political affiliation or proximity to political principals or governing parties, wherever they may be?
It will cover every public servant. Of course, we will not blame people who were employed in mysterious ways, because they did not employ themselves at the end of the day. But what we would then do is to say everyone who is in the public service needs to belong to this or that professional body, and we allow them time to register with those professional bodies. And belonging to a professional body also helps you with continuous training, because when you belong to a particular professional body, from time to time you will have to undergo training, you will have to be examined in terms of your skills and capabilities. And so there will be continuous learning, and it will also help to develop their skills. And in that manner, it will be then contributing to the improvement of service delivery. So it will affect everyone, those that are already in the system and those that are about to join the public sector.
Well, as with everything in our country, we're good with coming up with these new laws, regulations, policies, and so on. But at the end of it all, then lack the will to actually act on these great provisions. The Public Service Commission is waiting eagerly for the amendment of the Public Service Commission Act as well, to allow us more space to operate. And that legislation will be a game changer. I bet you things will never be the same, because the Public Service Commission will be empowered to ensure that there is adherence with these progressive policies that our government has, and there are consequences for those who consciously or unconsciously continue to flout these regulations. In other words, you're going to be given teeth in similar ways, similar to those that the Office of the Auditor General, for instance, was given a few years ago.
Exactly. That's where it is heading to, so that it gives us a responsibility to ensure that we are the custodians of good governance.
Commissioner Kloya, let's leave it there for tonight. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much, Vuyo.
He's, of course, a public commissioner. They released their latest report today, which looks at various problems in the public sector, where we have executive authorities. By that, we mean your ministers, your mayors, your MECs, premiers issuing unlawful instructions, really posing ethical dilemmas for public servants who have to act on unlawful instructions. Public Service Commission saying, of course, on top of that, trying to deal with those issues, but they are also hoping that they will be given the necessary teeth to be able to see these reforms or changes through. Let's hope indeed that that is going to be the case. Time to take a quick break, but when we return,
we are emerging stronger as the ANC, but we know that our work is far from done.
Ramaphosa optimistic even as the conference adjourns without concluding its business. I speak to political analysts Asanda Ngwesheng and Professor Beki Mngomezulu. ANC President Cyril Ramaphosa says that the 55th National Conference that has just been adjourned in Nasrec has actually succeeded in unifying the ANC and affirming its renewal. The conference was adjourned this afternoon until the 5th of January to complete outstanding work, including adopting conference resolutions from policy discussions. Well, joining me now are political analysts Asanda Ngwasheng and Professor Beki Mngomezulu. Good evening to both of you. Thanks very much for your time.
Good evening.
Thank you for having us.
Let's start with this rather, well, let me not put words in your mouths, but the fact that the conference couldn't finish its business, that has had to be postponed to January. It's going to be the task of the ANC's leadership to do that. Asanda?
I'm not surprised that they couldn't finish their business if you consider, as they said, that there were delays in the registration, there were delays in ensuring that people had the right accreditation and those who were going to vote actually had the right to vote, etc. And so it doesn't surprise me, considering the many delays that we saw, that we've come to the end and they haven't finished their business. But also, if you consider the kind of the level of rifts and the level of conflict that we saw, it wouldn't have been humanly possible for people to go from outright fighting each other at the level that we saw to being able to sit together and be coherent and be able to engage each other. I mean, if you look at, I was watching some of the briefings and they're talking about how some of those committees were actually missing a lot of people because, maybe people didn't win and therefore they went and they were sulking a little bit, or maybe people won and therefore they went and they were celebrating for almost too long. And so I've always wondered why they don't do policy discussions first and then, do the voting towards the end, so that you've kind of got the business of the discussion out of the way before you then start the voting, because I think that would kind of also remind them that they are on the same side in terms of belonging to the same party, and that they are there ideologically meant to be at least together or closer than apart. That's why they're in the same political party.
Well, it's not the first time, though, Prof, that a conference has run late or things have fallen behind. But at virtually every conference, efforts have been made to actually catch up, and decisions were taken to make sure that the constitutional commitments or obligations that the party, has are all met. In other words, people would find ways of playing catch up, but of ensuring at the same time that everything is done as per the party's constitution.
Absolutely, Vuyo. Ordinarily, you would want political parties to do due diligence whenever they have a conference of this nature. But maybe starting with the point that Asanda made, that under normal circumstances, you would expect that a conference of this nature should have policy positions as its focal point. But this is not the case. What would have assisted the situation would be to get the order differently this time around, given the experiences we are referring to, that this is not the first conference that the ANC has had. There have been a number of them since 1912. And in fact, just recently, they had a conference in 2017. So under normal circumstances, if you hold a conference in 2017, after the conference, you then sit back and then say, what worked, what didn't work. That which worked, you work on it going forward. And that which didn't work, you then, of course, give yourself time to try and correct the situation. In fact, I was talking to a friend of mine when I saw these delays of more than 7 hours, saying that would it not be better maybe to start the registration process and accreditation process at a provincial level, so that by the time you arrive at the conference, it's just a matter of authenticating those registrations, which would move a bit faster, and then focus on the main issues, and then pick up on the point that Asanda was making. Focus on the policies, because that is the core business, really. But then the people normally get so excited with these elections. When you lose, then of course you lose all the energy. When you win, you are overexcited and there is no focus. So that is why then you don't have policies being discussed at these conferences, because they are given a back seat when in fact they should be given priority.
Now, the president of the ANC seems or believes that if anything, they have come out of, or they are coming out of this conference a better people, a better party than has probably ever been the case before, or certainly, I mean, it has been the case in recent times. Let's take a listen to what he had to say around that.
What we hoped to achieve at this 55th conference was to unite our movement, to give momentum to the process of renewal, and to recommit ourselves to serving the people of South Africa. That is what we have done. We are emerging stronger as the ANC, but we know that our work is far from done. Now, more than ever, history demands that each one of us demonstrates that the unity and the renewal of our movement is indeed an imperative. This should give us that sense of duty to serve our people, our country, with no expectation of anything in return, but to earn the confidence and the trust of our people. So this national conference has affirmed what the people of this country believe and desire, that the ANC must be united, it must be renewed. They also have a deep desire that the ANC should continue living and that the ANC should continue leading. That is what our people desire.
Is that coming from what you saw, from what you heard? Did the conference indeed affirm what South Africans desire? Prof.
I mean, I think that...
Okay, that's the answer. Go ahead, Asanda, that's all right.
Okay. I think that, I think to a certain extent it did, in the sense that South Africans have been saying for a long time that they are tired of corruption. They've been saying for a long time that the ANC needs to clean up house. And they've been saying for a long time that the ANC needs to go back to basics and start looking at who is put in leadership, the ways in which they're put in leadership, and what it is that they really stand for. But the problem with the ANC, of course, is always that it has come to a point where they are, they fail to find people who are clean and who are scandal-free, because it's sitting at right now as we speak, as David Mabuza says, 97 members of the ANC are mentioned in that Zondo Commission. And David Mabuza said that, this is something that the Integrity Commission of the ANC is going to look at. And he also further said that the ANC is sitting in a situation where every single year they are getting more and more cases referred to them of members who are alleged to be corrupt and members who need probing. And this is not a good thing, because it's showing a political party that is increasingly embroiled in corruption, rather than a political party that is, one with good leadership and ethics. And I think this is one of those situations, unfortunately, where it was which of the two devils, which is the better. And the Cyril Ramaphosa camp seemed to be, for a lot of people, the better of the two devils. But I think everyone in South Africa knows that the corruption is endemic in South Africa, and that the 2 years that they have between now and 2024 may not be enough to get them to clean house in the ways that they need to, unless, of course, Cyril Ramaphosa decides to do a big cleanup, starting with Nomvula Makanyane, who is mentioned in that report, and then moving on to others who, will be making up the NEC, because those 97 members are going to include people who are going to end up inevitably in that ANC, and making sure that they do things like building special courts, making sure that they give capacity to the Special Investigative Unit, to the NPA, and all the units that need to probe corruption and to arrest people and put them in jail if that is where they belong.
Well, Prof, I mean, the ANC president went further, saying even though they've made mistakes, he reckons they have been able to pull themselves back. Take a listen to how he put it.
As the African National Congress, we have made mistakes, and we've had some missteps, and we have paid for them in many, many ways. But even having found ourselves on the brink, we have been able to pull ourselves back. And we've been able to come back from where many people thought we would stumble and fall forever. Because we know there is no greater task yet to be fulfilled, and that task is building a better South Africa that leaves no one behind. This conference has reaffirmed that purpose and that mission. There is no other reason for the existence of the African National Congress than to unite, to mobilize, and more principally to serve the people of South Africa. That is what the ANC exists for. And let us be clear that there's no other reason for us to join the ANC, and there's no other reason for us to seek or accept election to positions of leadership within its ranks other than to serve the people of this country.
Have they pulled themselves back, Prof, or was the ANC president saying that so that even if it's just to make the party faithful or those delegates feel good about themselves and their organization?
You know what, Vuyo, I'm really disappointed with myself and my high school English teacher, Ernest Mswaz Matenjo, will be disappointed with me. And also my university lecturers who taught me English at undergrad will be disappointed with me, because they thought that I understand the meanings of certain words that are basic. One of them is unity, and then the other one is stronger. And the president said the ANC is stronger now than it was before. Maybe I have to go back and look at the new definition of those two concepts. That is in addition to the one I heard, in fact, when they were discussing the Phala matter, when they were looking at facts and referred to them as allegations. So I now have 3 terms that I need to go and look up and see if indeed they mean what I thought they meant. The reality of the matter is the president is very good in making good noises. He presses the correct buttons, but come to action, nothing. This has been the case since he started finishing former President Zuma's term in 2018. He came up with a lot of promises. And this thing about us wanting to deal with corruption decisively, us wanting to unite the ANC, us wanting to work for the people and not for ourselves, is a story we have heard many times. The question is, when are we going to change those statements into action? That is what people are concerned about. It's just like when we hear about job summits, investment summits, so many trillions have been raised, so many factories have been opened, and people are getting retrenched. The question is, what does all of that mean to people in my rural village, to people in all the other rural villages who are in the same situation, if not worse? So they are asking themselves the questions I'm asking myself as I'm sitting here. Basically, the president is a politician. We can't take that away from him. So he talks like a politician. But for those of us who are not politicians, we are disappointed. Most of the things he's saying cannot be activated because what he says on the one hand and what happens on the other hand are 2 worlds apart.
Well, the man who is going to run the ANC on a full-time basis, Fikile Mbalula, who has been elected Secretary General, seems to, like his president, believe that by renewing itself, everything else then will fall into place once they show unity, once they are seen to be, singing from the same hymn book, then it's going to be easier for everything else to fall into place. Take a listen to how he put it at that very last briefing of the day before, after the president of the ANC closed conference.
Renewal or death. That's what we must do. When we say we renew, we must be unambiguous about the renewal. It must be felt, it must be seen that this is the party that is renewing itself, not a party that comes to a conference and struggle with registration. In the era of technological highway, people are using technology and all of that. What happened here will be something of the past. The ANC must be dynamic.
So from everything from being able to run these events properly, to avoid what yesterday he called mistakes, to making sure that their bureaucracy gets paid and paid on time, all the way to loving one another and making sure that no one speaks out of turn. He did say yesterday that these debates that are happening in the public where members or leaders throw mud at each other has to be a thing of the past. And he reckons that all those things put together will sort of lay the right foundation for the organization going forward. Don't know what we will make of that, Asanda.
I think, the ANC is very good at making amazing speeches and getting everybody kind of roused and feeling like, oh, maybe there's hope. But this is all too little, too late, in the sense that the ANC has had almost 30 years to get these things that they keep telling us at every conference are mistakes right. And they've had literal, 2 decades plus of experience in running a government, and yet they still make the same mistakes. And what is really heartbreaking is that it is not a situation where we have a governing party that has the wrong policies. They have the right policies. They just do not implement them. And when they do not monitor, they do not evaluate. And when they monitor, they do not evaluate, and they do not reflect on what it is that went wrong and how do we make sure that what went wrong in the past does not get repeated. And so I was in the Eastern Cape earlier in this year, and I came across many government projects, amazing government projects, cooperatives where people were given money for seeds, people were given land, people were given all the implements that they needed to start the project. Except when it came to the crux, when people needed Jojo tanks to be able to water these vast pieces of land that they had, the ANC and its comrades were nowhere to be found because they had eaten the remainder of the money. And so they had taken their pictures, they had gotten, enough information and enough implements to be able to write in the newsletters that these projects exist and that they have been implemented. And these projects, many of them failed. And the few that exist only because NPOs took up the baton, or funders and kind benevolent or philanthropists took up these projects and were able to get them to continue. And so this is the story of the ANC. Take a beautiful country, start to give us hope, take it from a negative economy into a positive economy, give us hope, and then drop us from a dizzy height. And so, we can't there's a saying that doing the same thing and expecting different results is basically madness. And at this point, as South Africans, we are kind of in a permanent state of madness because we've seen the script, we've heard these words, and yet we continue to do the same thing. And so I think for me, what's going to be interesting is how South Africans in 2024 really get their voices heard about what it is that they can no longer stand. Because at this point, we are not very far from an abused woman who gets beaten by the husband and keeps going back to them. And sadly, I've been hearing already people on various platforms already saying, well, at least Cyril's now promising this. At least it looks like there's renewal and hope. And I get sad when I see and hear people say things like that, because we're falling for the same trick over and over again. And while, it'll be great if for the next 2 years attempts are made, but we must never fall for this trick and believe that this means that the ANC is going to turn over a new leaf, because that would require institutional change at a level that the ANC just simply does not have the capacity or the political will for, starting straight from the ways in which patronage have become the business of the ANC, the ways in which the government of the ANC has built an infrastructure that is about extraction of money, extraction of power for personal gain. And until they change that attitude, until they change that system, and until even the ANC stops taking a percentage cut of their own deployees' salary, making sure that these deployees now run off and try and find a way to bridge that gap, we are not going to get very far.
Well, Prof, according to the ANC president, the path they have chosen is one of quote-unquote principled unity. In other words, not unity for its sake. Now, earlier, my colleague Sophie Mkwena spoke to Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma about what she made of the conference, of course, and this is what she had to say about how it's important for them to support one another, to support the new leadership if the party was to indeed move forward.
The conference went well. The new leadership has been elected. Of course, the new leadership must be supported. The contest is over, and the new leadership must embrace the losers must embrace the leadership. But the real victor is the ANC, and we are looking forward to working together in whatever capacity. We work in the ANC, it doesn't matter what capacity you are in, but you serve the people in whatever way. So we hope that we will be able to work together in whatever capacity until 2024 and beyond.
The reason I chose that clip, Prof, was because she's seen to be, yes, there's Dr. Zweli Mkhize, but she's also seen as being one of the biggest losers of this conference. Just listening to her there, did she give you hope that those who feel that they lost at this conference still have what it takes to actually get up again and still form part, or put their weight, their effort, their everything behind the leadership that was elected?
There were a couple of things that emerged in this speech by Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma. I watched it during the day, and I picked up a couple of things. One, she in fact read the script that all other politicians were reading from, saying that the elections are over, and we now have to put away our differences and then make sure that we focus on doing work for the ANC. That is what most of them have been saying. The only deviation she made was when she said there were winners and losers. The majority of her colleagues were saying that the majority of the colleagues were saying that there were no winners and there were no losers. The ANC was the winner. Whether that is true or not, then is something we can debate until sunrise. But the reality of the matter is that you have an election, people go there, of course, with the different candidates. Then we saw whatever commotion that happened, and then eventually some people emerged victorious. So the impression that is being created is that once the elections are over, we have to find one another and then work towards the same goal, which is rebuilding the ANC and then uniting the ANC, whatever the jargon people decide to use. But then for how long are we going to do that? Because the same narrative prevailed in 2017. We heard that now that the elections are over, we are finding one another, we are working towards the same goal. In no time, these differences showed themselves up, which is why then before the election, you could see these differences were clearing, and then now they are telling us that the differences have been put aside, they are now going to work towards the same goal. I've stopped believing what politicians say, because they say one thing and then they do something else.
Of course, Asanda, I mean, whether they say one thing and do something else, South Africans are expecting President Cyril Ramaphosa to be true to his word. In that 5 or so page a speech that he gave at the end of, or at the closing, he had, shall we call it, a to-do list, which talks about, dealing with the energy problems, economic development, the land issue, policing, crime, gender-based violence, and so on, committing, or shall we say, recommitting to all of those things that the ANC has been telling us the whole time, that these are its priorities. But all of this will be happening at about the same time that this whole renewal process will be, one of the highlights of the renewal process would be to weed out, those elements that he says have taken the ANC back, or have made it to go astray. Now, and some of these people are within the ANC, and some of them are within both the leadership core that was elected yesterday, and the National Executive Committee members, who are, of course, yet to be announced. And that is where often things sort of get stuck, because instead of going ahead or forging ahead with a great deal of speed with the things he was talking about here, which affect South Africans, often the ANC then gets held back by those conversations within the National Executive Committee about who's gunning for who, or trying to have or unleash state law enforcement agencies on.
Yeah, you've got, as I said earlier, you've got 97 members of the ANC mentioned in the Zondo Commission report, many of them likely to be in the NEC. We'll see if they will be tough on corruption against themselves. Secondly, their biggest winner, in this conference is Gauteng. If you notice that it was Gauteng that was having an internal conflict and unable to decide whether they are going to Cyril Ramaphosa or to Zweli Mkhize. And yet at the end of the day, they are the biggest winners, because most of the top 7 come from Gauteng. And so it's going to be very interesting to see how Gauteng politics are going to play themselves out, and how they're going to use or abuse the power that they now have in the top leadership, because that's going to set the tone for what happens at the NEC and what happens, all the way down to the branch level. And I also think, what's going to be interesting again as well is how KZN is dealt with, because we know that we've had July 2021, we've had the floods, we've had the re-election of Zanele Gumede, despite having been alleged to have stolen money from the previous flooding, and we're likely to see even more floods in KZN. And KZN is struggling right now to recover from July, from these floods, and we've seen the shadow of Jacob Zuma looming large over Zweli Mkhize's campaign, the shadow of Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma herself as another kind of proxy for Jacob Zuma, also looming very, very, very large, which made it very difficult, I think, for William Kiza's camp to be able to convince anybody that they will be able to be independent and do the things that are required. Those are people who are mainly running away from jail, running away from charges. They're not going to stop fighting for their lives, because it's a matter of going to jail or being completely kicked out of the political party, and many more dire circumstances that they're not going to take lying down. And so this is going to make President Ramaphosa's job very difficult, because he himself still needs to jump the hurdle of the Phala Phala report, which is only going to be tabled to the new NEC. And if he doesn't survive that, what people have been alleging is Paul Mashatile's play, which is that let's tackle Ramaphosa, through the report once he's in the presidency, and let's take him out, and then he becomes the president. And so those politics are not going to disappear simply because we have made speeches and we have agreed to be the top 7. But what's interesting, though, is that they have the potential between now and January 7 to do a little bit more campaigning to make sure that either the Ramaphosa camp or the Zweli Mkhize camp gets more votes within the NEC, or that they come to an agreement to have a more united NEC. But either way, those are going to be difficult conversations. And I don't think that, considering the complications, the ANC will be able to do what it says it needs to do and it is going to do. And they don't have the time. It's 2 years between now and 2024.
In fact, in Cyril Ramaphosa's own words, it's all about greater urgency and greater action, and that's how they will be judged. Special thanks to both of you, Asanda Ngwasheng, Professor Mngomezulu, for agreeing to come on the program today on this very last day of that marathon ANC elective conference that ended this afternoon, but of course without having completed their business. That has been left to the National Executive, to the leadership of the ANC to finish, and they are going to do so on the 5th and 6th of January. That's our show for tonight. Thanks for watching, but do join us again tomorrow evening, same time.